local elections. In the end, the left and our progressive brothers and sisters can be faulted for a lot of action and agitation, but very little governing. So in order to govern, we're going to have to put people in elective office who, as I said this morning, who represent us and who are us. So one of the activities that the IPOs engage in are endorsements and grassroots elections. And the Civic Lab operates workshops. We have one coming up on September 19th, how to run for local office here in Chicago. However, once you decide to do that, you run into some obstacles put up by the Chicago machine. So I'd like to bring up our next speaker, and that is... So let's get resituated to drink some knowledge from election attorney par excellence, Andrew Finko. So Andrew is an attorney in Chicago, and he concentrates his practice in the areas of election law, debt defense, and fair debt collection practices. He's represented dozens of independent and progressive candidates in election-related matters over the past 10 years, fighting for ballot access rights all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court or the United States Supreme Court. He also represents people and businesses that are being sued for various kinds of debt, so they are not taken advantage of by debt collectors. Now here's a fun fact. Andrew was one of the election lawyers who attempted to disqualify Rahm Emanuel from appearing on the ballot in 2011 through the residency requirements of the law. Can you imagine the balls of this guy? All right, Harambee, Andrew. Here you go, brother, here you go.
Thank you. All right, there are 3 handouts that are coming around, and I will talk about. There's 3 handouts, and I'll be talking about them as we progress. I'm going to start off by giving you just some general information about the election, the election code. I'll walk you through some of the more specifics about petition gathering, and then I'll kind of wrap it up with some of the details about nomination papers, files, and what might be coming down the road, such as an objection. So we all know the election is February 26th, 2019. Number one thing to know. Petition gathering starts August 28th, and it continues all the way through November 26th. November 26th technically is the last day to petition. It's also the last day to turn in your paperwork. So I don't suggest waiting until that time. I would say get out the door on the first day and hit the ground running as hard as you can. Even though and the signature requirement is only 473 for aldermen, it is harder than you may think to get signatures, particularly in some wards where that number is proportionally 10 or 11% of the voters from the last election rather than 5%, which is what the election code technically says, which is still a large number. Some wards, it's a much lower percentage from the last election, but you have other obstacles such as large condos or apartment buildings with a doorman who will not let people in to just circulate. So you have to kind of figure out your own strategies. But let's start with, the petition, just to make sure you know the dates. August 28th, first date to start circulating. First date to file the paperwork is November 19th. At 9 a.m., the door is open. You want to be in line, your candidate wants to be in line before the doors open on November 19th, ideally, and that's in order to get a lottery or to get into the first ballot slot. If you are really in a crunch and you're realizing, I don't think I have that 2 to 4 times the number of signatures that I would need for a safety factor, you could continue circulating until that last day, the 26th, and then file at 4 p.m. on the 26th, and then you would be eligible for the last ballot slot lottery. All right, so let's start. There's three handouts that I have. The first one is a 2-pager. It has my letterhead at the top, and it has general info and petition circulating summary on the first page, and then there's a few other paragraphs on the back side. The second packet the second group was a summary of the technical requirements for the office. That's from the State Board of Elections. It just says what's required, that you have to be a resident of the ward for 1 year, you have to be a registered voter in that ward, you have to be not a felony, no felony convictions. Those are the only real requirements for the office of alderman. If you want to run for some of the other municipal offices, we'll have to talk later. It's a little bit of a different situation. And then the third is a packet of paperwork that has a statement of candidacy on the first page. This packet
Are there more of that first packet you were talking about?
there should be enough if they're around someplace.
Yes.
Yeah.
Missed that one.
So you all right now have a great start to petition gathering because I've given each of you an appropriate approved clip. The metal clip at the top is an ACCO, A-C-C-O, that's the brand. You can buy them at Staples and other places, generic, it doesn't matter. But this clip is the generally accepted method for binding paperwork. And you get one of these 2-hole punches, and that's how you do it. We'll talk a little bit about the binding, but it's very important. Don't lose that metal clip. If you want to use it, you can go out and buy more if you need them, but this should take you through the candidacy. So, all right, let's start with some of the tips about circulating. So you got and if you want to look at it, the petition sheet will look something like the third piece of paper in the bound packet, and it's the page that has a lot of lines for voters to sign. I'm presuming you've seen something like this, or you've been approached on the street to sign a petition. The form that is in it is called a P5. It's in the top right corner, SBE number P5. There are candidates who have actually taken this piece of paper from the state board, hand wrote it out, and photocopied it 100 times and used that as their petition. You can do that. My suggestion is that you type it up and format it yourself to make it look better. For sake of reference, I have put on a sample at the back of this packet of a random alderman's petition sheet, and it's a little bit different. It's typed up. It's toward the back. Some alderman who's been around forever and maybe needs to go, but just take a look at what that looks like. You can format it. Now, the problem you have is that the election code is big. It has a lot of parts to it. Most of them don't apply to this election. The part that applies is Article 10. If you want to look it up, it's ilga.gov is the website that has the election code. Article 10 is what applies to the Chicago municipal election, and it applies under the auspices of what's called nonpartisan. Nonpartisan is just a technical term because in all practicality, everybody's affiliated with the party. You just can't put your party affiliation on the paperwork. It really doesn't matter what the party affiliation is outside of the paperwork. But it is what's called a nonpartisan election. So you're running under that particular section of the election code. So the paperwork is prepared through the guidance of that section, and this template from the board, this form P9, is what the state board has prepared as its interpretation of what Article 10, Section 10-4 calls for in this type of a petition. You can change it if you want from 15 lines to 10 lines. You could add, and I recommend doing this, a printed name column, because a lot of times you can't see a signature, you can't make out a signature, and if somebody has 3 or 4 or 100 people that live at that same address, it's really tough to figure out who it was that signed, so I always recommend a printed name column. This template from the state board, again, it's just a template. It is not the form. It is just some guidelines. So I would suggest making your own petition sheet. When you have your petition sheet, you have a choice. You can print them up on your own printer. You can send them to a printer. There are candidates who prefer to support unions, and so they will go to a union printer. There are some good printers, there are some not so good union printers. If you want to do that, then you create your PDF, you email it to the printer, and they will just print it up for you, 100 or 200 or 500 copies, whatever you want, and they'll put the union bug at the bottom. That's what the union printer does. people sometimes recognize that. It's up to you. The election code does not impose a requirement to use a union printer. That's completely voluntary. You can mix petitions, so you could have petitions that you print up at home to get started. And then, you know, a month later, you're like, oh, I need more petitions, let's go with the union printer. They'll put the little bug at the bottom. That's fine, that's not a problem. You cannot change your petition midstream otherwise. You cannot use a second petition. You can't use a different looking petition. It has to be verbatim identical for all of your, throughout your whole candidacy, your petition gathering. So when you have your petition prepared, it's important to note how you want your name written on the petition itself, because the way that your name, or the candidate's name, if you're working for a campaign, the way that the candidate's name is written on the first page of the petition is the way that the name will be printed on the ballot. Now, the requirement under the election code is to have the surname, and then any combination of the first name, first initial, or some combination of those, optionally a middle initial, middle name. It's all up to you how much you want to add or subtract. If you want to put in a nickname, then you have to be cautious. Your nickname has to be something that is generally used to describe you and that you've been using for years and years and years. Don't say, you know, oh, Andrew the winner, Finko. Well, no, you know, unless you know, you can't put in there, you know, next alderman, Finko. You know, I mean, you can't do that. So it cannot be something that is political. It has to be something that you've been using for a while, like, you know, Michael, Mickey, O'Brien. You know, that's fine. Or you know, Alfred, Al, you know, Jones, whatever is something that you're familiar with. Do not use a title, Reverend, Doctor, Sir, whatever you want. Don't put any titles in your name. Just keep it as short and simple as you can, whatever is appropriate. Oh, and then if you've changed your name within the last 3 years, there's an extra provision that you have to add in to the petition sheet that says, I used to be known as this, and now I'm known as this name. So that's the general nuts and bolts of the petition sheet itself. If you have, like I said, you can change things around a little bit, whatever you need. The bottom part has to be there, the circulator's affidavit. The top part, in similar wording, would have to be there. Now, this form is a general form. You could customize it and change it, and that's why I put in the alderman's form at the back end. You can see that it's a little bit of a different wording, but you do need to have the general elements that are shown on the template. Once you have your petition sheet, I would suggest having a circulator training where you go over with all of your circulators what is allowed and what isn't. So one thing I suggest for all campaigns is to ask their circulators for 2 categories of IDs. The first category would be a state-issued ID, and I'm not asking for like official anything, I'm just saying photocopy. Take a picture or photocopy, and it's for the benefit of your campaign later. So state-issued ID, driver's license. That's the one category with a picture and the address. And the address is important. The second category would be take a copy of like a lease, a utility bill, a pay stub, something else that has the address on it that was mailed to the same address and that is somewhat official, not junk mail. And the reason is that the only requirement for a circulator is, there's a few requirements, but the only real thing is that they have their residence address written down on the petition sheet. It has to be their residence address. So that's what I'm saying up front. Get a copy of the ID and get a copy of something else that shows the address where they reside, and make sure that they're all the same, that you don't want to have 2 different addresses floating around out there. So, all right, let's go through the petition. Who can circulate? Anybody who is 18 years of age or older, a U.S. citizen, and is willing to sign the affidavit at the bottom. That's pretty much it. There is a little exception that says somebody who is going to be 18 at the time of the next election can circulate. I would strongly suggest that you be very careful about having minors involved, because somebody who's 17 is still a minor. There may be other complications, and you know, there's a maturity level. I don't know how, you know, it's a case-by-case basis. I would say as a general rule, to avoid any problems, just say everybody's got to be 18. and at the time of circulating, and that avoids that issue. U.S. citizen is a requirement. Somebody has a voter registration card, that's proof of citizenship. The petition circulator must write down their real residence address. It has to be where they really live. It does not have to be a permanent address. It could be a temporary address. If they're they're staying with friends for the fall, and they're going to help you circulate, and that's where they're living for that 4 months, 3 months. That's fine. College students often have apartments near their school. Their home could be someplace out of state or a different city. That's their parents' house, whatever. They can use where they reside. So that would be their college address. That's not a problem either. The circulator does not need to be a registered voter. That's something that, there was a law in the past that said you have to be a registered voter, you have to be in the ward, in the district. That's been found unconstitutional, and so now it's anybody can circulate. You could have friends and family from out of state. You could hire petition gatherers from out of state. That's not a problem. And when I say cannot circulate for any other candidate in the ward, that's not an official provision in the election code for this particular type of case, but I would say you can't circulate for other candidates in Democratic elections and other cases. I would say it's a good rule for loyalty, for trust. Just make sure that your circulators are not circulating for any other aldermanic candidate in your ward. I mean, if they want to circulate for somebody else in the suburbs, big deal, that's not a problem. I'm just saying competing candidates, you probably want to vet the circulators to say, hey, we're playing on the same team here, and I need your full support, your full loyalty. And then the other thing that the circulator must do is they can't just mail in the petitions. They've got to actually show up in front of a notary and sign the petition sheet in front of the notary. And if they're not willing to do that, and they're just saying, I'm going to just turn them in for you, well, you got to be careful, because that's a red flag. Nobody can sign a sheet unless that's the person that watched all of the people on that sheet sign their names on that sheet. It has to be somebody that saw all of those people signing their names. There's a little bit of wiggle room. So if I'm standing here and I have 4 people around me and I'm watching all these 4 people getting signatures people are coming up and signing, I can sign as a circulator for each of those 4 sheets, each of those 4 clipboards, because I saw the voters signing their names. And I was able to listen and say, yeah, the people that I was having help me out in front of me were asking, are you a registered voter in the ward? Are you willing to sign this petition? And they said, yes, okay, so I can sign these because I watched the voters sign their names on it. Now, you can't do it by leaving a petition in a lunchroom. You can't leave the petition at the end of the bar and pick it up in a week. You actually physically have to watch that person sign their name and write their address on that sheet. So let me wait for questions again. All right, so that gets us to who can sign the petitions. It's registered voters in the ward. That's pretty much it. Each person has to sign their own petition sheet. You can't sign for a relative. You can't sign for a friend. A voter can only sign a petition sheet one time, and for that person's real name. They can't sign. A husband and wife situation comes up a lot. And my wife's out. Do you mind if I sign her name? Because I know she would support you, because I support you. So that's not technically permissible. And oftentimes you can see it because the handwriting looks very similar, same address, same name, husband, wife. And one of those is going to get challenged. So the goal is to have the best signatures you can, and quite a bit more than the required number in order to avoid a challenge. The best way, and this is the only campaign advice I think maybe I'll give you, but the best way to get the signatures is going door to door. And door to door following a walk list. And a walk list is literally a list of registered voters written in street order by number, so that you can walk down one side of the street, you can walk down the other side of the street, and you go to the houses that are shown on the walk list, And those people that are on that list are guaranteed to be registered voters at the time that list was printed, and they were registered at that address. So you've got already a big head start. For the resources, I would suggest, so the Chicago Board of Elections can give you walk lists for free. Go over to 69 West Washington on the 6th floor. As soon as you get off the elevator, you turn right in that elevator hallway, and there's like a window just to the right of the elevator bank, and they have all the different maps and walk lists. You can get, if you want, you can also get ward maps for free. So this is a sample of a ward. This is a sample of a ward map.
There you go.
All right, thank you. All right. This is, and they give these out. So it's great to have it so that you know where your ward boundaries are, because we know these aren't easy to follow a lot of times. So use the resources that are at the Chicago Board. Get the walk lists, get the, and then ask if there's a supplement to the walk list, because sometimes they'll have walk lists that they printed up a few months ago, and then instead of reprinting everything, they'll just print up a supplement that updates for that particular precinct, ward, whatever you want, up until the time you obtain those. So that's who can sign the petition, is the registered voters in your ward. They have to be registered when they sign, registered voter at that address. They have to write the address at which they are actually registered. So some of the other things, the do's and don'ts of circulating, again, the circulator, the person who is going to sign each petition sheet, and it's an under oath affidavit, it's sworn testimony. Do you swear to tell the truth? Yes, okay. Then you can sign the page. That's like no different from under oath testimony in court. So there's a penalty of perjury, and you do have to watch out for that. The circulator has to be honest, and there were a few cases where criminal charges were filed against circulators that had not followed the oath. The oath has to be accurate. So the circulator has to watch the voters sign their own names on that petition sheet. If the circulator, if somebody comes up and says, hey, I got these 20 sheets, and they're all filled out, but there's no part at the bottom, be careful. I would say throw those out, turn them away, whatever it is. If somebody's coming to you with 20 or 50 sheets that are filled out with voters' names, but the bottom is blank, that's a red flag that you're getting set up. And you're getting set up for an easy knock off the ballot. Because what that means is that somebody who's out there circulating petitions gives you these sheets. If any of your campaign staff sign on the bottom as a circulator, that's perjury, first of all, potentially perjury. It's also a real problem because the person who's signing did not see the voters up above there actually sign their names. It's more common than you would expect. There's a lot of people that turn in sheets with the circulator portion at the bottom blank. Don't use those sheets. Do not. You will get set up for a pretty embarrassing objection later on. Do not leave the petition sheet someplace to pick them up later. The bottom part of the petition sheet, the circulator's affidavit, has to be signed by the circulator in front of a notary. So they have to be physically present together at the same place, same time. And the notary then has to watch the circulator sign the sheet. The circulator can pre-fill the bottom part. They can write their name, they can write their address in, they can put in their name into the notary block if they wish, if there's a time crunch. But I would not fill in much more than that. Don't fill in the dates or anything else. Let the notary fill in the notary portion, and then the circulator signs when they're in front of the notary. Use a good quality dark ink pen. I had a situation with the State Board of Elections, which was using red ink when they were going through a records exam, and they would write S or O, sustained, overruled, on an objection appendix page, which is where how the appendix is tabulated. And they were emailing me these pages saying, here's the results. And I said, well, thanks, but I don't see anything. You're sending me the same appendix pages back. Well, it happened to be they were using red ink, which didn't scan. So the election code doesn't say specifically what color ink to use, but there's a potential if you use red ink, it won't, when you submit the paperwork, we can see that if we're not colorblind. We would be able to see the red ink, but the paperwork would be scanned and then sent out. Anybody who wants to get a copy of it can get it through an email or a request from the board to review the candidates' petition sheets. They would not see those red signatures potentially if the scanner is the kind of scanner they were using at the state board. But I would just say stick to the straight, solid ink. Go. Make sure it's visible. You don't have any problems that way. There should be never, ever, ever should there be a P.O. box address or a business address anywhere on your petition sheets. Just no, it can't be. Because people don't live at P.O. boxes, they don't live at their business, and there might be an exception if somebody has a home office, okay, that might be the only exception. But normally, I had a guy file an objection one time, and he used his union office as the address. He said, I'm residing at this and I'm registered to vote at this union office. I'm like, do you live there? No, okay. So they ended up dropping the objection because that wasn't a valid voter address. A voter address has to be a residence address. The other thing, okay, so when you're walking the streets, make sure your team keeps the petitions clean, dry, somewhat presentable, because at the end of the day, the original petition sheet, the sheet that's been walked on the street all over, is the one that will be hole punched, the clip will be put through it, the pages will be numbered at the bottom, and that will be turned in. The original sheets only will be turned in to the Chicago Board of Elections. So you can't make photocopies. If you make photocopies for your own use, keep them separate, very separate, and make sure you keep your petitions during the course of the campaign in a safe place. Whether that's a safe, like a bank safe that you have at your office, or just someplace that's a locked file cabinet, someplace that is not generally accessible. There have been situations where I've heard about a car being broken into and petitions being stolen. So be cautious, prepare for the worst, and hope for the best. The other thing that sometimes happens is there's somebody who says, I don't want that voter because that voter's not in my ward. Don't bother striking out signatures. And it'll happen, it inevitably will happen, that somebody will sign, they're on an edge, there's someplace, well, I thought I was in this ward, maybe I'm in the other ward. Don't strike out. Just leave every signature in there, because there's no maximum. So you can just turn in as many as you want, and the rule of thumb is that you have to put in between 2 and 3 or 4 times the number of signatures in order to avoid a real challenge. Because unfortunately, the process is flawed. The signature comparison is an unrealistic comparison. It's a comparison of somebody signing on a clipboard in a hurry in a small box on a petition page versus signing at a desk at the Board of Elections, sitting at a table where they're actually taking their time. So, and it could have been years ago. Who knows when somebody signed their voter registration card? It doesn't mean it's a false or forged signature, but if those signatures don't match what's in the database, you will lose that voter. Same thing, if that voter's address is somehow different, and say, you go to their address, they're registered at that address, it's on the walk list, and you sign it, well, by the time the petitions are filed, they moved. Now they're at a different address. That voter could be challenged and stricken. That voter could be recovered if you show, oh, well, at the time they signed, they resided at this address. So save your walk lists, because a walk list is an evidence of registration. The other thing you can do is just get the voter's history through a FOIA at the Board of Elections. So general thing, be courteous because you are representing the candidate. So be professional. If somebody's hostile, walk away. If they're not interested, walk away. You're not there to convert somebody over to a candidate. You're there to talk to people who are open and receptive to change. If somebody is set in their ways, this isn't the time or the place to do that. That's up to your candidate and how they want to handle that. But try to be courteous because you don't want to get into any altercations or arguments. So that's the petition sort of gathering and process. At some point, you're going to come up to a number, you're like, okay, well, we're done. We've got 2,000 signatures. We're going to turn them in. So what do you need to turn in? And I'm going on the back of the first page, the nomination papers that must be filed with the Chicago Board. So the Chicago Board of Elections is the entity that oversees the Chicago election. It was created as a separate election authority. The Cook County Clerk oversees the suburban Cook County area. So you'll be filing with the Chicago Board, 69 West Washington. Chances are the filing will be in the headway, the lower level, lower level, where they'll have a setup area for people to come in and file their paperwork. They'll provide information on that as the time approaches. Now, the documents that you'll need, and that's in this metal bound packet, you will have to file a specific set of documents in addition to the petition sheets that you've been gathering for 90 days. The first document would be the statement of candidacy. There's a template. Again, this document you can type up on your word processor. If it's substantially the same, it will be fine. You have to, it has to track the requirements of the election code. The State Board of Elections believes that this document, this statement of candidacy, tracks the election code, so I would use this as a model. Fill in the information that you need. Take out the stuff that's not relevant. If it's village, unincorporated area, you don't need those words. That's the first document that you'll file. On the back side is what's called the loyalty oath. Despite many, many revisions to the election code, which are very frequent, the legislature has not removed the requirement for a loyalty oath. It's still written into the election code, so people still file them. The caveat is that there have been 2 or 3 Supreme Court and Illinois Supreme Court decisions that have said the loyalty oath is unconstitutional. And it's unconstitutional for a number of reasons, and it's up to you whether you file it or not. The election code does not mandate, because of the Supreme Court decision, the election code does not require a loyalty oath. So what happens is the Board of Elections skips over it, doesn't even look at what's written in there. You could say blah, 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 loyalty oath, sign it, notarize it. It would have the same effect as signing this particular template from the State Board. The next document, and this is very, very important, and this is a separate little side note, is the Statement of Economic Interests. The Statement of Economic Interests can be filed on the day you file. It's located in the same office, and a lot of times the clerk, so the Statement of Economic Interest is filed with the clerk of Cook County, not with the Chicago Board. So you file it with the clerk's office first, and you can file it if you want, anytime. You can file it now. You can file it next week. You can file it in October, November. As long as you file it, the Statement of Economic Interests, before November 26th. Before November 26th, you have to file it, and then what the clerk will do is give you a receipt. That receipt now has to be filed with the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. All right, so it's a 2-step process. If you fill out the Statement of Economic Interests and you put it in with your packet, but you don't file it with the Cook County clerk, you will not be a candidate. Absolutely, 100%, you will not be a candidate. You have to file the Statement of Economic Interests with the clerk first. The receipt that they give you will be a file stamp receipt, and then you file the receipt with your paperwork. Now, in the packet toward the back, there is this is right before the petitions and right by the loyalty oath, there is a sample Statement of Economic Interests receipt, okay? So the receipt is, this one is stamped November 7th, 2014 at 4:01 p.m. That's the technical receipt. This candidate was being a kind of a wise guy, and they cut off the statement of the rest of the receipt. Because the receipt that the clerk's office gives is basically a photocopy of the Statement of Economic Interests with the stamp on it. So the receipt is what they give you. The electoral boards have said, well, a candidate can cut that off. All they need is the stamp. So technically all you need to do is put the stamp from the clerk's office into your paperwork with the Chicago Board. So that's a very, very important step. Do not use the Secretary of State's forms. Do not file with the Secretary of State. Do not file with the state of Illinois in any way. The statement of economic interests must be the Cook County Clerk's form, and it must be filed with the Cook County Clerk. It's very important. People miss that and they get kicked off the ballot. So the next filing document would be your petition sheets. Now, the petition sheets, like I said, you punch them at the top, put the metal bracket through, and put them in any order that you want. There's no requirement for how you assemble them. The very, very, very super important part is to number the pages in order. Start with number 1 on your first petition sheet. Generally, you want to have, a good start, as they say, so put out your solid sheets, maybe, something that you're confident in. Put your sheets in order that you want to present them. So number 1 will be listed at the bottom. So it says sheet number at the bottom. While your petitioners are gathering signatures, tell them to leave that alone. Don't put a number in, leave it blank. After we're all done, you're ready to submit them, you put them together, you hole punched them, you bound them. Then you start numbering them. And you number them with 2 people so that one person's watching the other person, so you don't misnumber, you don't double number. It has to be consecutive. If you miss it, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's not a problem if you miss page 3. If you miss a page along the way somewhere, that's not a big problem. If you double number a page and you're already done and somebody's going through and checking them, just make one of them an A and one of them a B. All right? Something to just differentiate. Or page 200-1 and 200-2. You have to distinguish the numbers somehow to make them different. Or you pull that page out, you put it to the back, and you cross out that one of those 200s, and you make it the last number 400 something. Not a problem to do that either. There are strikeout and deletion pages that would go on to the end of this if you had a maximum. So say if you were running for state rep, 1,500 maximum signatures, there's a process we go through, we check signatures, we strike out the bad ones, and we submit 1,500 rock solid signatures rather than 1,500 random signatures. So that's not going to apply in an aldermanic race. Do not fill out a deletion page. You do not need it. All right, so that's pretty much up to the nomination pages. Now, when you file it, make sure you have the original paperwork. It's bound meaning with the metal clip. Do not use one of these. These binder clips are great for everything, in the office and around the house. Do not use this for your paperwork. This is not, it may work, but you're opening yourself up to a challenge. People have gotten on the ballot with these. I've fought and I've got somebody on the ballot with one of these. But why open that door? Why give somebody an opportunity to knock you down? You can use wire. There was even a case that was reported where a guy was standing in line and somebody told him, hey man, your paperwork's not bound. It's all loose. And he's like, what do you mean? Oh, you got to put up, bind it. So then he takes a pen, he starts poking holes in them, takes the shoelace out, strings it up. That was okay. Resourceful, yeah. So as long as it's sort of held together. Now, don't send it off to Vistaprint to make a book. No. Leave that for your photos of your grandchildren and kids. Do not glue it because the Board of Elections has to separate it. So that's why this system with the metal clip has been generally accepted, because it's easy to open up, easy to close, put back together, and it's not anything that's going to be, a challenge for the board. So let's go to the next step. Okay, say you filed, and I'm just going to go quickly over the following because we're not here to talk about that, but the next step is after you file your paperwork, there's a 1 or a 2 week time period. And you can do this for your other competing candidates, your opponents as well. Pull their paperwork. It's always a good idea, whether you're going to object to them or not. Get a copy of your opponent's candidate's paperwork to know where their bases are. Where do they get their signatures from? You can look at those areas. How many signatures do they have? Do they look good or not? That's when you would think about, okay, is there a, something in their residency issue that would preclude them? Is there something else that would maybe raise the question about a challenge? That's up to you later on. But if you file on the 19th of November, then there's a 2 week time period. If you file on the 26th, there's a 1 week time period for reviewing paperwork. The objections have to be filed a week after. the petitions are filed. And the objection is a process where the electoral board, which will be the Chicago Electoral Board, will meet. They'll set up hearing officers, which are attorneys that are working for this particular election season. They'll review the paperwork. They'll set up what's called a records exam, which is where they sit in front of the computers at the board, look at your signatures, look at the addresses and signatures on the board's computer. And there's a board employee who will make a decision. Good signature, bad signature. Registered voter, not registered voter. You know, that's what the process is. And one by one, your signature numbers will be dropping, okay? At some point, there's processes where you can rehabilitate those signatures. You can, if the objection is improper, you can try to dismiss it, try to strike it. But the problem, and a lot of people that I see who've never been in this situation are shocked by the speed at which this whole process goes. The number one priority of an electoral board is to get a decision. Not necessarily the right decision, the best decision, a fair decision, but a decision that is generally reviewing the election code to see whether or not the paperwork generally complies with the election code. So don't count on a long proceeding. This is going to be 2 to 3 weeks. You'll know if your candidate's on or off the ballot. Objections will oftentimes include what's called pattern of fraud. Pattern of fraud is something that is important as you're going into the petition gathering time period, because a lot of times the pattern of fraud arises from a circulator doing something or not doing something. So if you can control the circulators and you can have a good control over who's circulating and how they're circulating, you can eliminate a lot of the problems later. But if you're not keeping an eye on your circulators, and this is a problem that happens often with paid circulators who have an incentive to make money, not necessarily allied to the campaign, that they may take some shortcuts here and there. If that becomes a widespread problem, that's when you start triggering these pattern of fraud allegations. Almost all objections have a pattern of fraud paragraph in them. Maybe 10% of those actually have some meat to them. And probably, smaller percent actually go and prove fraud and show that somebody did something wrong and should be removed from the ballot. Now, the risk for, and this again relevant to petition gathering, if your circulator has a problem and is found to be engaging in something unethical, whether it's the circulator was signing and then somebody later was notarizing, so they weren't in front of a notary, or the circulator didn't get all those signatures, they had a team of people. There was a recent objection that I was involved in, which had, one person was signing, and they had a team of people that were going out in the field getting the signatures. That's a problem. That's fraud. So if a circulator is found to have engaged in a pattern of fraud, you potentially lose all the sheets from that circulator. The good ones, the bad ones, all of them. That's a big hit on your signature total. So you want to be careful about circulators up front to avoid potential problems later. The other thing, okay, so campaign finance just wanted to touch on that. $5,600 is the threshold. When you get or loan or spend $5,600, you have 10 days to file with the State Board of Elections. Now, the campaign finance is important because that's another opportunity to remove you from the ballot. If you make a mistake on your campaign finance, and the state board finds you owing money to the board, and you don't have it squared up before the ballot certification date, they will then issue a notice to the Chicago board to say, this candidate owes money to the state board and is not qualified to be on the ballot. You will be removed from the ballot if that's the situation. It's not very common and not likely in this situation, but it does happen, especially if somebody's run before, they have a committee that's already established, they have some fines from the previous election, and now they're running for alderman, that could preclude them from being on the ballot. The campaign finance is a whole separate process. It's through the State Board of Elections, not through the Chicago Board. And all that the State Board does is look at money. You want to have a separate campaign bank account. You probably want to have somebody who's pretty good at bookkeeping, keeping track of all of your money going in and out. There's a Form D1 that you file to create this committee, and it's a political action committee for a candidate. And then every 3 months, you've got to file a quarterly, a D2 form. And then if you get money that is over $1,000 or more, You have to file an A1 within 5 days. So there's a lot of requirements at the state board's website, elections.il.gov. I got the website at the bottom. You can look at, there's guides about campaign finance. That's a whole nother lecture, a whole nother seminar, because that's a completely different area. But I suggest that you check out the websites. I listed there's 3 websites at the bottom. The Chicago Board is the #1 place to keep up with things. Chicago Board will periodically post information, and it's a good resource. If you can't find something, go over there and talk to somebody. They're very helpful. It's the best run Board of Elections in the state. So they really know what they're doing, and they are a good entity. They're an agency that is there to help. They will provide some assistance for you. The state board only deals with campaign finance. You're not going to be involved with them until you hit that 5,600, and then you create your committee. If you don't anticipate fundraising in the near future, I think that's a mistake. But if you don't have that money, don't file the D1. Wait until you get the money. So the problem by filing a D1 early, all of a sudden you now have all these reporting obligations. If you miss a quarterly, say you got no money, I filed it, I had a candidate like this. He filed this ambitiously, hey, I'm running for office. He files it in like May. And then, he's gathering petitions later on, and he gets some letters from the board. Hey, you didn't file your quarterlies. $600 fine here, $600 fine there. And he says, I got 0. I got no money. Too bad. You have to file, even if you have zeros. It doesn't matter. And that means fines, that means extra headaches. So hold off on filing the D1 until you're seriously getting some money coming in. But you do still need to keep track of your money. So say you have a fundraiser and you get $2,000 from a bunch of people. Keep track of who's giving you the money. Keep it in your accounting net records. If you spend money, get receipts, keep track of that in the accounting records. And then when you hit that 5,600 mark, you'll know, and that's when that obligation to file the D1 triggers. One last thing, sorry, it's a bad thing to end on, but Chicago Ethics Department, it's not part of the election code. Technically, it does not preclude you from being on the ballot. One of the other objections I filed to Rahm Emanuel was that he did not file his ethics form before he filed his candidate's paperwork. And the ethics ordinance is very general. It says, well, when you wake up one morning and you say you think you want to run for office, you've got to file this ethics form. Because when you decide to pursue a candidacy, this ordinance says you should file this ethics form. So whoever has publicly disclosed somewhere that they are running for office will probably be getting a letter in the mail from the City of Chicago Ethics Department telling you that you need to file this ethics form. Although it's not part of the election code, it is an ordinance, it is enforceable. I suggest you just fill it out and send it in, because there's no real harm to doing that. You're already disclosed, you're a candidate, you will be filing your paperwork, you'll be filing your statement of economic interests with the Cook County Clerk. That will be public. So file the ethics form just so that you don't have somebody calling somebody to say, hey, have somebody over there investigate it because they didn't file their ethics form. It's an extra headache that you could avoid by sending in the form. I think that's about all that I was, the other thing, notaries. If a notary has a question, the Secretary of State has this notary handbook. It's available at the website. It answers a lot of questions about what a notary can or cannot do.
Wow. Andy, Finko, holy mackerel, that's a fire hose of information.